Good morning. Good morning. And welcome to the First Unitarian Church. It's good to have everyone here this morning. It's wonderful to have you guys here with us in our worship service this morning. I want to give you just a little snapshot of what we're going to be talking about in church this morning. Do you ever wonder when you're having fun in your Sunday school what actually goes on in here? Do you ever think about it? Rosie? You do? Okay. You are an exception. Now, we're going to be talking about a lot of things, but in particular, that's what's really we're going to focus on is a Jewish holiday called Yom Kippur. Have any of you ever heard of Yom Kippur? There's one. There's one. Did you grow up in New York? No, okay. If you had grown up in New York, you'd all know what Yom Kippur is. But we're not going to get into so much about, what the do's and don'ts of Yom Kippur. But you know what's really important about Yom Kippur, although there are many aspects to it, it's a chance for people to think about, have I been a nice person? You have been a nice person? Yeah, okay. Well, sometimes we need to ask ourselves because there are so many connections in our lives. Are we as nice? Yeah, we're nice. But are we as nice as we could be? Maybe that's the more difficult question. Are we as nice as we could be to our parents? Are we as nice as we could be to our brothers and sisters? Are we as nice as we could be to our friends? And those who aren't quite into our circle of friends, how are we treating them? Are we doing okay? Are we really doing the best we can? And what about people we don't know at all? How do we treat them? Am I being as good a person as I can be? So this is a holiday which really makes adults think hard about that question. And if they come up short with an answer like, I'm not really, I'm not that nice and I could be a lot nicer actually, then this is the time to begin a whole new life in terms of how you're going to be with other people. Now, one of the things we're going to do here, and next week is going to be a lot easier because we're going to have a long thing to light the flaming chalice. I'm going to ask one of you to volunteer to light the chalice by match today. Well, okay. Well, it's a tie over there. Finn, you want to come up and help me? So let's go up here. Have you struck a match before?
Yeah, but
you're not crazy about it. Yeah. Okay.
One actually struck.
Okay. I tell you what we do. Let me give it to you, okay? And then you're going to repeat the words after me, okay? I'm going to give you. Whoa. Got that? Mm-hmm. All right. Great. Let's blow it out. Don't put it in the water. Just put it over here. Here's a mic. And you want to just read the words, or you want to say them after me? Okay, go ahead.
Symbol of light, symbol of knowledge, symbol of warmth, symbol of freedom. We light this chalice as a symbol of our faith. Here we gather to celebrate hope and the infinite possibilities of love.
Fantastic. Finn, thanks very much. And now we can open our service by turning our hymn books, please, to number 347. Our words for our time of quiet reflection are inspired by one of the absolute greats of the Unitarian ministry in the 20th century, A. Powell Davies. A. Powell Davies was minister of the All Souls Unitarian Church in Washington, D.C., and was probably not one of but the chief clergy person who was very openly fighting against Joe McCarthy and all the, the House on Un-American Activities, and it was just an absolute marvel. Of course, being in Washington helped a great deal, but he really was an inspiration to all to pick up the good fight. It's something that we had to do to make sure that the United States would be kept as a democracy. But aside from his great political involvement, he also was just a really wise and fine teacher and minister. And back in those days, so we're talking about, late 1940s, early 1950s, what he did was broadcast his sermons on the radio. And people gathered in suburban Maryland and suburban Virginia. They gathered in homes and they listened to his sermons on radio. And then those houses just got too full to contain all these people, and then little churches started springing up. And today we have, about 20 to 30 very successful Unitarian Universalist churches all around the suburbs of D.C., suburban Virginia and suburban Maryland. Did it all with radio. Can you imagine what he could do with today's technology? Wow, where our church would be. We would probably be the dominant religion in America today if he... Yeah. Anyway, I think he gives some very helpful words here for us to reflect on this morning. The years of all of us are short. Our lives precarious. Our days and nights go hurrying on, and there's scarcely time to do the little that we might. Yet, we find time for bitterness. What can we do to stretch our hearts enough to lose their littleness? Here we are, all of us, all upon this planet, bound together in a common destiny, living our lives between the briefness of the daylight and the dark. Kindred in this, each lighted by the same precarious, flickering flame of life. How does it happen that we are not kindred in all things else? How strange and foolish are these walls of separation that divide us. Amen. What is your purpose? You can just write that down on a piece of paper and give it to me at the end of the service. That'd be great. It's a piece by David Brooks. Many of you know I have a love-hate relationship with David Brooks. I think he's a very astute observer of cultural life, but when it comes to political matters, I need to talk to him. He writes, I think, a very helpful piece here. What is your purpose? Every reflective person sooner or later faces certain questions. What's the purpose of my life? How do I find a moral compass so I can tell right from wrong? What should I do day by day to feel fulfillment and deep joy? As late as 50 years ago, Americans could consult lofty authority figures to help them answer these questions. Some of these authority figures were public theologians. Reinhold Niebuhr was on the cover of Time magazine. Rabbi Abraham Heschel wrote about everything from wonder to sin to civil rights. Harry Emerson Fosdick wrote a book called On Being a Real Person, on how to live with integrity. Other authority figures were part of the secular priesthood of intellectuals. John Dewey advocated pragmatism. Jean-Paul Sartre and his American popularizers championed existentialism. Hannah Arendt wrote big books on evil and the life of the mind. Public discussion was awash in philosophies about how to live well. There was a coherent moral ecology you could either go along with or rebel against. All of that went away over the past generation or two. It's hard to think of any theologian with the same public influence as Niebuhr and Heschel. Intellectuals are given less authority and are more specialized. They write more for each other and are less likely to volley moral systems onto the public stage. These days, we live in a culture that is more diverse, decentralized, interactive, and democratized. The old days, when gray-haired sages had all the answers about the ultimate issues of life, those days are over. But new ways of having conversations about the core questions haven't yet come into being. Intellectual prestige has drifted away from theologians, poets, and philosophers and toward neuroscientists, economists, evolutionary biologists, big data analysis. These scholars have a lot of knowledge to bring, but they're not in the business of offering wisdom on the ultimate questions. The shift has meant there is less moral conversation in the public square. I doubt people behave worse than before, but we are less articulate about the inner life. There are fewer places in public where people are talking about the things that matter most. As a result, many feel lost or overwhelmed. They feel a hunger to live meaningfully, but they don't know the right questions to ask, the right vocabulary to use, the right place to look, or even if there are ultimate answers at all. I find there is an amazing hunger to shift the conversation. People are ready to talk a little less about how to do things and to talk a little more about why, ultimately, why. This is true among the young as much as the older. In fact, young people raised in today's hyper-competitive environment are, if anything, more hungry to find ideals that will give meaning to their activities. It's true of people in all social classes. Everyone is born with moral imagination, a need to feel that life is in service to some good. I have another brief moment to welcome all of you here to First Unitarian Church in Salt Lake. And also, what we do this quite regularly. We inquire who might be here for the very first time, because it really means a lot to the congregation to learn, who has come here and might be exploring or just visiting. And we want to kind of reach out to you and make you feel welcome. So the best way to do this is simply to ask if you would be so kind as to stand if you're here for the first time, so we can find you during the coffee hour. Welcome. Welcome all. Up there. It's great to have you with us. Thank you for coming here on such a nice day, too. It's great to have you here. Today is actually a perfect day to visit our church, because following the service, we have what we do this once a year, an activities fair. And all of our different groups and committees and fun things and business things, they all meet outside. They're behind tables. And it's a wonderful way to realize that this congregation is more than a drop-in on a Sunday morning kind of thing. We are really very active 24/7. And so here you have an opportunity now, and this is for those who are new and those who have been here forever, to just kind of survey, what are the great opportunities that exist for us to get acquainted with and also possibly to volunteer for. And if you haven't done this too often and you're not quite sure how it works, let me suggest that some of the activities table offer food. And you may want to visit those tables first, just to make sure, and then you can go around the courtyard and see what else is there. So it would be great to welcome you there. Coffee outside, a splendid day, a lovely buzz, and thank you all for being here this morning. At this time, the offering will be gratefully received and a chance to greet one another and wish each other a good day. Yom Kippur, Detroit, 1929. 3 members of the ruthless Purple Gang, a mostly Jewish mob, whose mission resembled that of, well, Al Capone in Chicago. These 3 guys went to high holy services at B'nai David in the northwest part of Detroit. The brothers, Louis and Harry Fleischer, and their friend Henry Shore, sat in the synagogue during the service, not suspecting that the 3 men in the back of the synagogue, disguised in black Hasidic garb, were actually G-men, ready to arrest them on charges of arson, violence, and murder. Now, you got to understand that Yom Kippur services are quite lengthy, and they kind of have built into them intermissions of a kind, where you take a break, you get up and stretch, roam around a bit. But when the 2 non-Jewish G-men, dressed as Hasids, used the intermission to light up a cigarette, you don't strike a match on the holy days or light a fire. The gangsters smelled trouble and successfully got away. It's a true story. It's a true story. But it also makes you wonder why gangsters would bother to attend religious services in the first place. Yom Kippur means Day of Atonement. And although it is unlikely that these 3 mobsters were going to atone for their crimes and change their ways, they probably were hoping that God would forgive them once they explained the circumstances of their situation. At some point, all of us come face to face with our own mortality, regardless of our chosen profession. When the reality sinks in that life is finite, we become a little more circumspect about who we really are and why we have chosen to live in the manner that we do. Every time it dawns on us that we might need some improvement and that change is always possible, we move a little closer to making life more meaningful. Yom Kippur provides that opportunity to examine who we really are, the choices we made, our relationship with others, be they in the family, business connections, neighbors, all with whom we are in contact. Now, if we're not sure where we stand with all of this, it's sometimes helpful to check what's on our mind when we first wake up in the morning. What are we thinking about? First things that come to mind. Where are we directing our energies? What are we focusing on as we arise each day? I mean, we wake up and we're thinking about career. We're thinking about bank accounts, house, car. What are our attachments, really? Now, Yom Kippur begins on Tuesday, and in the Jewish tradition, Rosh Hashanah marks the Jewish New Year. And that's when God inscribes each person's fate for the coming year into a book, the book of life. But that which God has in store for you for the coming year is not sealed. It's not completed until Yom Kippur. So you have about a week between God's initial verdict and his final verdict of what this new year is really going to serve up for you. And that's a week. That's enough wiggle room to amend your behavior, seek forgiveness for all the trespasses, all your trespasses, those committed against God, but also those committed against other human beings, our families, our friends, the stranger. How did we treat our fellow human beings during this past year? Good question to pose for an annual review. Could we have been kinder, more understanding, more generous? Did we live our lives morally, sometimes necessitating a little sacrifice for the sake of others? Did we live with reverence? Reverence, what a word. The Baal Shem Tov, founder of Hasidic Judaism, tells us the world is filled with wonders and miracles, yet we take our little hands and cover our eyes and see nothing. This is really a remarkable observation for a mystical rabbi who's all about God's voice emanating from the burning bush and all about the parting of the Red Sea. But he's really now talking not about supernatural miracles, but the miracles folded into the everyday, taking place right in front of us. And I wonder how often we remove our hands and behold. I'm just trying to keep track for a couple of days. All of a sudden, there's a flock of Canadian geese, and as if somebody gives the nod, whoosh, just majestically, they all rise into the sky. What a sight to behold. Or just walking by the neighborhood and hearing children playing innocently in their backyards. Or maybe you can hear the distant sound of somebody practicing his or her flute. They're just doing the scales. But do you ever stop long enough to see how amazingly red those tulips are in the spring? You ever notice that before you go racing off to your SUV to make the next appointment? Jews hope that during the days of awe, that short interval between the new year and the final verdict written into the book of life, Jews hope that by all their petitions and confessions and promises of selflessness, they will be forgiven by God and He will be merciful in the new year. I envy Judaism, this ritual. Not many of us have reason or are given an excuse to examine our lives that critically. To ask essentially, how am I doing? How am I doing? Good question. I mean, it's not like the former New York Mayor, Ed Koch, who went up to everybody he saw in the streets and he says, hey, how am I doing? How am I doing? That's not quite like that. Nonetheless, how am I doing? It's an important question we need to ask of ourselves, and it deserves an honest answer. Do my life choices, my attitude, and my attitude towards family members, my behavior towards friends, my detachment from others, my commitments, passions in life, do they really reflect my best self? The book of life. Wow. What a powerful metaphor that is. A great, great image. An accounting of who we really are. Because you can't fool God. How conscious are we really of our misdeeds, our unkind treatment of others, our selfish pursuits, you know the menu. How do we stop long enough to address our failings? And basically, this whole idea is quite positive because it implies we have the capacity to save our souls. We can save our own soul. It requires, however, a bit of discipline on our part, like making time for reflection, feeling contrition, offering confession, and promising humility before the wonders that bless our lives. Scrutinizing how we live our lives ought to be a human exercise that extends far beyond a Jewish tradition. It really boils down to our own accountability. First of all, do we believe that we have any accountability at all? Or do we live simply as though it's all about us, period? Would we be served well by allotting some time to break from our everyday habits and addictions and attachments and obsessions, break from them long enough to inquire of ourselves how we are faring in this crazy, jumbled affair called life? How am I doing? Are we still able to find an ethical path through it all? And if we stop long enough to seriously ponder these questions, we actually engage then in a profound spiritual work. We sometimes need to travel deep within to reach that place inside where things really matter. I mean, we know well our superficial lives, which we live in a fast-paced, unthinking way. But it's spiritual work to actually remove our hands from our eyes and finally see. It's spiritual work to dig deep so we can reflect honestly on the moral choices we have made and what is entailed to live meaningfully. The language and the process need not be particularly religious, as David Brooks noted a few months back, when he highlighted in very secular terms that we basically have 2 points of reference from which we map out our lives. He states, there are 2 sets of virtues, the resume virtue and the eulogy virtue. You know where this is going. The resume virtues are the skills you bring to the marketplace. The eulogy virtues are the ones that are talked about at your funeral, whether you were kind, brave, faithful, Were you capable of deep love? So the question is, do we chart our lives assembling a fine resume? Or do we live so that when we are eulogized, our lives exemplify the good that exists in this world? Now, I'm going to assume that most of us would lean more towards the eulogy virtues. After all, when our life is finished, it matters how we are remembered, does it not? Do I want to be remembered for my middle management skills? Or for a life built on kindness and generosity and love? But why then? Why does our culture drive us towards achieving career success, which often entails sacrificing meaningful relationships with our spouse, our children, our friends? Why do our schools focus more on teaching skills and strategies to reach these conventional notions of success rather than concentrate on the qualities, the very deep qualities of a person's life that lead to making good decisions and living meaningfully? David Brooks rightly insists that we are actually more clear on how to build an external career than how to build inner character. We're a lot more comfortable, it's a lot easier for us to concentrate on the external career than the inner character. In living for external achievement, he comments, years pass, and the deepest parts of you go unexplored and unstructured. You lack a moral vocabulary. It is easy to slip into a self-satisfied moral mediocrity. You figure as long as you're not obviously hurting anybody, and people seem to like you, well, you must be okay. But you live with an unconscious boredom, separated from the deepest meaning of life and the highest moral joys. Yom Kippur makes us more contemplative. It's a time for deep introspection, a time to weigh just how much our habits preclude a spirit of generosity. You know, when God makes an entry into your book of life, again, what a powerful metaphor for realizing that our life choices have consequences. There's an accountability for how we treat others. There's accountability for how we regard others in our daily lives. Now, sometimes a personal tragedy will shake us to our senses, and we suddenly see life more clearly, as though our hands have been removed from in front of our eyes. And sometimes we have these moments of introspection when our own mortality becomes acutely visible, and we want to make some necessary changes in our conduct before the curtain comes down permanently. I'm going to move now, a little transition, which I think will really illustrate what I'm trying to say here. In Tolstoy's brilliant novella, The Death of Ivan Ilyich, really a classic tale, it highlights, I think more than anything else, a spiritual awakening. An awakening that comes at the end of one's life. Now, I define spiritual in this case as finally taking the inward journey where Ivan begins to recognize the truth about his life as compared to how he thought he was really living. For all intents and purposes, His life was a good life. He climbed the career ladder. He climbed the social ladder. He became a leading magistrate in upper-class 19th century Russia. He's married to Praskovia, married her as much for convenience, really, as for love. He is unsupporting towards her, both in a failed pregnancy and also in a successful one. He distances himself from the family through attention to his work and male camaraderie. He is focused on career advancement, a nice house, keeping things pleasant. And all this falls apart when he develops a mysterious, eventually fatal illness. Treated by doctors who exhibit the same uncaring professional distance that he employed in his legal career, emotionally abandoned by his family as he had abandoned them, and surrounded by people who will not name his condition for what it is, he experiences profound loneliness. Out of that loneliness is born a sudden doubt about his whole life. He says, "Perhaps I did not live as I should have." Imagine coming to that conclusion. Perhaps I did not live as I should have. Perhaps all the time I thought I was going up, I was actually going down. He wrestles with this terrifying prospect during his last days, initially resisting it, but eventually realizing that his life had been shaped by values that were self-destructive and terribly hurtful to others. In today's language, he lived for the sake of external achievement, following the virtues for resume rather than eulogy. What a time to realize that so close to your death. When we all come face to face with our own mortality, we realize the resume matters very little. Ivan receives an epiphany at the end of his life. He begins to feel compassion for his family and resolves not to act in ways that may hurt them. And at the end, he sees a light, and he is free of pain. He no longer fears death. In place of death, there was light, wrote Tolstoy. And his character, Ivan Ilyich, exclaims, "So that's what it is. What joy." If only for a moment, Ivan thought of the welfare of someone else, something that throughout the whole novella he had never done before. In that moment of simple compassion, his own suffering disappears, replaced by acceptance and even exaltation. Now, far from resembling Yom Kippur, Tolstoy offers what he considers a Christian perspective. Tolstoy had just converted to Christianity, and he writes this novella and explains that beyond death is God's living light, and that Ivan died into a new life. And yet, I was kind of scratching my head, it does seem appropriate to refer to Ivan Ilyich on Yom Kippur because at some point in our lives, we do confront our mortality and discern our lives more clearly. Now, I can't quote chapter and verse because I dimly remember, I read this a long time ago, it was another book by Tolstoy. It's called The Confession. And he says something like, nobody can explain the meaning of life. And Nobody can understand the meaning of life. So just live. Go ahead. Bust loose. No constraints. Why not? Just go out, go to town. Meaning of life? Who understands the meaning of life? Sounds pretty tempting. But Tolstoy says, I used to live like that, but I can't any longer. I keep thinking about my death, and that's all I see. Our mortality can rattle us. Our mortality seems to magnify all of our failings in human relations, our life choices, those choices that seem to scream out, entitlement, who do you think you are? Getting it right in life looms as something virtually unattainable. But how wise to search our hearts on occasion and kind of check in with ourselves. Am I fooling myself? Am I living as though accountable to nobody? Accountable to no thing at all? Our spiritual journey, as many teachers will tell us, is right before our eyes, rooted in the acceptance of who we are, including our faults and frailty, and in the discovery of the miraculous nature of the ordinary. Even with our limitations, we can still experience and share the beauty of life. The miracle, one great teacher explains, the miracle is not walking on water. The miracle is walking on this earth. Amen. Can we conclude our service? Turning our hymn books, please, to number 21, For the Beauty of the Earth.
As we extinguish the chalice, may we continue to worship, to live with our eyes and ears and fingertips. Let us love the world through heart and mind and body. Amen.
For many years, this congregation has been blessed with the membership of Louis Fazio. He has been courage for us and inspiration, and Louis has supported us. He is, somehow, he's decided to leave for warmer climes. And he is going to be going later this week to Tucson. And we're going to miss him very, very much. And Louis just wanted to take a second to say farewell to all of you. And then as we go out, grab our coffee, and look at the activities table, let's make sure we say goodbye to Louis. Louis, you got some comments for us?
Thank you, Reverend Tom. As Tolstoy said, he walked on the earth with some regret and some joy. I roll on the earth in my confession with some regret and some joy. The joy on this earth has been being part of First Church in Salt Lake City. That's why I am honored to not say goodbye, but I'll see you later. Mitch Albom, who wrote the 5 people that I would like to see in heaven, I'm very blessed because I've already seen some of those 5 people. I thank you very much for your human kindness, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Thank you.